My ex told everyone I cheated, so I showed them the truth. He left town in shame. I'm writing this because I am still processing everything that happened. I keep thinking if I can lay it all out in order, maybe it will finally make sense. Or at least stop replaying in my head every time I try to fall asleep. Before I proceed, ensure to drop a like, comment and also subscribe. Let's get this part out of the way. I never cheated. Not once, not even close. But when someone you trust decides to torch your reputation to cover their own tracks, sometimes the truth doesn't matter. At least not right away. I guess I should start at the beginning. I met Ethan when I was 22. He was 26, had a crooked smile that made him look boyish and harmless, and he worked in the same building as me. We ran into each other in the elevator a few times before he finally asked if I wanted to grab lunch. Thought he was sweet. He remembered the little things I told him. How I took my coffee, the name of my dog, the fact that I was studying for my graduate exams. He felt like someone who actually paid attention to me. In the beginning, he was attentive in all the ways that make you feel chosen. Texting me good morning before I even woke up. Bringing me sandwiches when he knew I'd be too busy to eat. Picking up my dry cleaning without asking. And when you're young and a little lonely, that feels like the gold standard of love. I didn't notice how fast it was moving until we were 6 months in and he had a key to my apartment. By 9 months, he was staying over almost every night. By a year, we were talking about moving in together. The first time he accused me of being unfaithful, it was almost laughable. We were at a birthday party for one of his friends, and I spent maybe 15 minutes talking to a guy from Ethan's old college. He was funny and friendly, and I barely even noticed the time. But when we got home, Ethan was silent in that way that makes your stomach knot. I asked what was wrong, and he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You couldn't even wait until I was out of the room to flirt with him?" Thought he was joking. I laughed, this brittle, confused laugh, and said something like, "Are you serious?" He didn't answer. He just went into the bathroom and slammed the door. That night I lay awake, wondering if I'd actually done something wrong. Maybe I'd been too friendly. Maybe I was careless. Maybe he had a point. It seems obvious now that this was the first red flag. But when you love someone, you learn to second-guess yourself before you question them. Things calmed down for a while. He apologized the next day, said he'd had too much to drink, that he was just feeling insecure because the guy had been a star athlete in college. I let it go. But the seed was planted. And over the next year, it sprouted into something darker. He started making little comments. If I dressed up, he'd ask who I was trying to impress. If I stayed late at work, he'd want pictures to prove I was in the office. If a male friend texted me, he'd scroll through my phone and read every message. Every time I told him it was too much, he'd apologize and say he was just afraid of losing me, that he'd been cheated on before and couldn't help being paranoid. He said if I loved him, I'd reassure him. So I did. Over and over until it became routine. Then, after 2.5 years together, he cheated on me. I didn't find out because he confessed. I found out because the girl he was seeing sent me screenshots of their messages. She said she'd just realized he had a girlfriend, and she didn't want to be part of it anymore. At first, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. The tone in those texts was so familiar. The same warmth he used with me, the same little jokes, the same affectionate nicknames. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He just sighed and said, "I knew you'd find out eventually." He tried to spin it like it was inevitable. That our relationship was doomed because of my coldness. That I'd pushed him away. That if I hadn't made him feel insecure, he never would have looked elsewhere. And because I was exhausted from years of trying to prove my loyalty, some part of me almost believed it. But I didn't want to fight anymore. So I told him to pack his things and leave. He didn't move out right away. He spent 2 weeks sulking in the apartment, sleeping on the couch, acting like he was the victim. He told everyone who would listen, his friends, mutual acquaintances, even people at my office, that I had been cheating on him for months, and that was why he'd stepped out. At first, I didn't realize how far the story had spread. I'd stopped checking social media, stopped answering calls. It wasn't until a friend pulled me aside at work and said, "I'm so sorry about everything," that I knew. I asked what she meant. She looked uncomfortable, then said, If you were unhappy, you could have left. You didn't have to do that to him." I felt like I was going to be sick. Ethan was methodical about it. He told people he'd caught me with another man. He said he had proof. He said I'd confessed. None of it was true. But he was calm and convincing, And because he'd always been so outwardly attentive, people believed him. I tried defending myself. I told anyone who would listen that he was lying, that he was projecting. But once a story like that gets traction, you sound desperate trying to refute it. My own coworkers, people I'd known for years, started treating me differently. Like I was untrustworthy. Like they were waiting for me to crack and admit it. My landlord asked when Ethan would be removing his name from the lease, and when I said he'd moved out, she raised her eyebrows like she'd heard something else. I thought about moving, about changing my number and starting over in another city. But the more I sat alone in that apartment, staring at the ghost of the life we'd built, the angrier I got. Ethan had spent our entire relationship accusing me of things I never did. And now he was going to get away with it. Well, if he wanted to play this game, I'd play it better. The first thing I did was message the girl he'd cheated with. I thanked her for telling me the truth and asked if she'd be willing to talk on the record. She was sympathetic, she'd been manipulated too. She agreed. Then I pulled up all the old texts where Ethan accused me of cheating, where I defended myself, where he admitted he was insecure. I compiled every screenshot into a single PDF. 3 years of gaslighting in black and white. I emailed it to my closest friends, the ones who'd been most supportive of him. I didn't include commentary, just the evidence. Next, I reached out to the mutual acquaintances who'd been spreading rumors. One by one, I asked if they'd be willing to hear my side. Most ignored me, but a few agreed to meet. I printed out the messages between Ethan and the other woman, along with a timeline of when their relationship started, months before he claimed I'd cheated. I showed them everything. Watching their faces as they read was like watching scales fall from their eyes. One of his friends, someone who'd blocked me on social media, actually apologized. He said he'd believed Ethan because he seemed so sincere. That was the trick. Ethan was always so calm when he lied. So rational. So certain. But when the facts were laid out, the story fell apart. Word started to spread. I didn't have to do much after that. The truth had momentum of its own. A week later, the girl he'd cheated with posted her own account on Facebook. She tagged Ethan by name. She included screenshots of their conversations. She said she was tired of being painted as the homewrecker when he was the one who'd lied to both of us. It went semi-viral in our social circles. People shared it, commented, asked questions. I didn't say anything publicly. I didn't have to. Ethan tried to do damage control, but by then, no one believed him. His calm, reasonable persona cracked. He lashed out at people in comments, called them traitors, threatened to sue. Within days, he stopped posting altogether. Mutual friends told me he'd packed up and left town. No forwarding address. No explanations. Just gone. Sometimes I still think about how easy it was for him to destroy my reputation. How quickly people believed the worst. But I also think about how quickly it all unraveled when the truth came out. And how satisfying it was, after all those years of being accused, to finally have proof. He thought he could shame me into silence. He thought he could smear my name and walk away clean. But in the end, he was the one who had to run. And I'm still here. After he left town, people asked me if I felt vindicated. Some days I did. Some days, I'd sit in my kitchen with the sun pouring in the windows, drinking coffee I didn't have to share, and I'd feel weightless. Free in a way I hadn't even realized I wasn't before. But then there were nights when it still crept back into my head, the question that gnawed at me. How did I let it go that far? I replayed it over and over. The slow erosion of my confidence. The way he'd study my face when I was talking to someone else. His jaw flexing like he was cataloging every word I said. The way he'd touch my lower back just a little too firmly when another man was around, like he was reminding me, and everyone else, who I belonged to. In the beginning, it was easy to mistake that for protectiveness. Like maybe it was romantic, that someone wanted me so badly they couldn't stand the thought of losing me. That's what he always said anyway. He'd wrap his arms around me at night and whisper that he didn't know what he'd do if I left. That he'd never recover. It took me years to understand that what he was really saying was a threat, not a confession. I started therapy about a month after he disappeared. I didn't even know how to explain why I was there. When the counselor asked what I wanted to work on, I stared at the carpet and said, I don't know who I am when I'm not apologizing for things I didn't do. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's a good place to start." We spent weeks untangling it. The way he'd slowly shifted the goalposts, so that nothing I did was ever enough. The way he'd project his guilt onto me, accuse me of the very things he was doing. The way he'd made me complicit in my own humiliation. I started to realize how many little betrayals I'd overlooked because I didn't want to be alone. Like the time he'd accidentally read my emails and found a conversation with a male colleague about a project. How he'd insisted it was flirting. How he'd refused to believe otherwise even after I showed him the entire thread. Or the time he'd told me my best friend wasn't good for me, because she'd called him out on his behavior. Or the time he'd shown up unannounced at my office and waited in the parking lot, claiming he just wanted to surprise me with lunch, when really he'd been checking to see if my car was there. I started writing it all down. Page after page, memory after memory. At first it felt like self-punishment, but over time it started to feel like an exorcism. Like if I could get it all out, I'd finally be free. Meanwhile, I watched the ripples of what he'd done keep spreading. Even after the truth came out, some people still acted like it was messy, that I'd aired everything. Like I should have kept quiet, taken the high road, let him leave with his dignity intact. But he hadn't offered me the same courtesy. He'd lied with so much conviction that I'd started to doubt my own sanity. Why should I protect him from the consequences? Changed my locks. Closed our joint bank account. I cancelled the gym membership we'd shared. Every time I severed one more connection, it felt like reclaiming a little piece of myself. But the hardest part was the loneliness. Not just the loss of him, but the loss of the life I thought we were building. Plans we'd made. The stupid little traditions. Watching movies on Friday nights, making pancakes on Sunday mornings, arguing about whether the dog should be allowed on the couch. Some days, I missed the version of him I'd fallen in love with. The sweet, attentive man who remembered my favorite flowers, who would rub my shoulders when I was stressed. But I had to keep reminding myself that version wasn't real. Or if it was just another tactic, a mask he wore to keep me close. I started going out more. I'd sit in coffee shops with a book, even if I couldn't concentrate on the words. I needed to be around people, to remember that the world was bigger than the orbit he'd trapped me in. Sometimes strangers would smile at me, and I'd feel this pang of envy, like how easy it must be for them to trust people, to take kindness at face value. I wondered if I'd ever be able to do that again. One evening, a few months after Ethan left, I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through the last box of his things. Old concert tickets, receipts, a handful of photos I couldn't bring myself to tear up. In one of the envelopes, I found a folded piece of paper. It was a list he'd written in his cramped handwriting, titled "Things to Say If She Asks." My hands were shaking as I read it. There were lines like, "Tell her you're worried about her mental health. Say you saw her texting late at night. Remind her she said she'd always be honest." It was like a cheat sheet for manipulating me. I remember thinking, this is who he really was. I burned it in the sink. I never told anyone about that list. Not even my therapist. It felt too intimate, too humiliating. Like proof of how thoroughly I'd been played. But it also finally killed any last shred of guilt I had for exposing him. He hadn't just lied. He'd planned it. Over the next year, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I repainted the apartment. I bought new sheets and towels in colors he would have hated. I adopted a second dog, even though he'd always said one was enough work. I took a weekend trip alone to a city I'd always wanted to see, just because I could. There were nights I still cried, not because I missed him, but because I was so angry that I'd let myself shrink to fit inside the cage he built around me. But slowly the anger faded. One afternoon I ran into an old mutual friend in the grocery store. He looked surprised to see me, like he half expected I'd have moved away in disgrace. We talked for a few minutes, polite but wary, and then he said, almost apologetically, "You know, we all believed him." "Sorry. I really am." I didn't say, "I forgive you." I just said, "I know." And I meant it. 'Cause I did know. People believe the story that's easier to swallow. The one that fits the neat little boxes they already have in their heads. It was easier to believe I'd cheated than to believe Ethan was a liar. But the truth always finds its way out, eventually. Sometimes I wonder where he is now. Whether he started over in some new town with some new woman who doesn't know how charming he can be. Whether he tells himself that he was the real victim. But mostly I don't think about him at all. Because in the end, he left town in shame and I stayed. And every time I walk into my kitchen, past the little patch of scorched countertop where I burned his list, I remind myself, he doesn't get to own this space. Or me. Or my story. Not anymore.